Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it's my number 13 team in my 2025 NFL Deep Dive Series. It's the Houston Texans. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Houston is a team that was down in the dumps, that was in desperate need of massages, and boy did they get way too many apparently, but they got rid of that guy, and it all seemed to be crashing down until they brought in head coach Demeco Ryans, and he immediately turned this all around along with the general manager, getting CJ Stroud and Will Anderson in there, and in 1 year they became a playoff team. In 1 year they got back to being the top team in their division, the AFC South, and they continued that into last year with some regression, which we're going to get to. But I think from an overall team building perspective, Houston has done very well over the last couple of years. I do look at Demeco Ryans as being very Mike Tomlin-esque in how they're trying to build a culture here. Him taking on a much more CEO role that I think people expected him to. He's still very hands-on with the defense side of the ball, but I think he's gradually giving more power to Matt Burke, as we'll get to. There's just some inconsistencies on the offensive side of the ball. You know, you can blame injuries for that. You can blame over the constant turnover of offensive coordinators and offensive staff and position coaches. Sure, I think that plays a part in it. So they're looking to get some stability on the offensive side of the ball for CJ Stroud. And they added a bunch of weapons here in the offseason. Jaden Higgins, the rookie. Jalen Noel, the rookie. Nick Chubb in the running back room. Maybe Tank Dell gets healthy again. Maybe he doesn't, but they got Nico Collins there on the outside. They added Christian Kirk to play in the slot. And then you got Dalton Schultz, who's going to be working those seams. They got a plethora of offensive weapons mixed in with Joe Mixon, one of the better running backs in the league, and we'll get to all that. The only problem is that they traded away their best player, Laramie Tunsil, for no apparent reason. And their big solution to improve the offensive line was to sign Cam Robinson. We'll get to that. I beat that topic into the ground, I promise you. On the defensive side of the ball, Demeco Ryans put together one of the better groups in the entire league. Will Anderson, Neil Hunter on the edges there. Then you got Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter as the outside corners. You got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, CJ Gardner-Johnson, whatever you want to call him, coming in, playing the safety role, coming over from Philadelphia. Jalen Pitre, one of the best nickelbacks in the entire league. Not nickelback like this, nickelback as in slot corner. And then you got Jimmy Ward coming off of an injury. You got Kalen Bullock, who's sort of settling in as a safety 3 in this scenario. Maybe safety number 2, depending on if Jimmy Ward gets back healthy. They also added some sneaky depth all across the defense. So it's really to the credit to Demeco Ryans that he wants to run a very balanced defense and wants to be able to have a nice rotation in all these places. You look for the deficiencies on the interior of the defensive line, though. That could cause problems throughout the year for this team. But like I said, it's all up to the coaching staff. It's all up to Demeco Ryans, who's coming in here. My 12th ranked coach, 88 grade. I'll pair that up with Matt Burke, who gets an 87 grade, 13th. He's the defensive coordinator. And Demeco Ryans is one of the top defensive minds in the modern NFL. That's why he got the head coaching job after having a lot of success in San Francisco. And kind of opposite of what we saw with Robert Saleh, who he replaced in San Francisco. When he transitioned here to the head coaching position, he was able to actually really turn things around the way that this organization expected him to. And probably did it way faster as well than a lot of people were expecting. This was a team that was in shambles. Didn't know the quarterback position. You know, they had the Deshaun Watson controversy, but then they went and they said, okay, we're going to add our 2 stars on either side of the ball. We're going to do it right away. CJ Stroud, Will Anderson. And it ended up working out perfectly. He got his leader at the edge position. He got his leader at the quarterback position. Now, from a defensive perspective, they were able to really develop their players right away. You know, Derek Stingley and, Jalen Pitre really came into their own under Demeco Ryans. And that's a testament to how great he's been as a coach and as a guy building up a scheme. You can even look at some of the linebackers there that have had some good seasons, but then they've added some guys as well. You know, Blake Cashman and Azeez Al-Shaair were added, and they played really great together. The interior of the defensive line has been the real issue here, so Demeco Ryans is going to have to figure out a way to develop that interior, though they've added some really good players as well. They got some good depth. You know, Tommy Togiai is someone who's a real sleeper for me, and we'll get to him in a bit. But they've really mastered getting those like 3-4 defensive end types. for the interior defensive line, I think are going to perform really well for them, from Mario Edwards to Demeco Autry. They got those guys pretty much down pat. It's finding the more traditional interior defensive lineman, like the one tech, nose tackle type, that I think is the real struggle for Demeco Ryans and the real test for him and his defensive staff coming up this year. But from a culture building standpoint, he really flipped everything on his head really well. And he brought over a lot of what they had in San Francisco on both sides of the ball. And I think now having Nick Callie, who was associated with the Rams previously, he does come in as my 25th ranked offensive coordinator. There's concerns about the offense. They have all the bodies, the offensive line. They kind of hung themselves out to dry trading Laramie Tunsil. So there is some downgrades on the offensive line this year, which is a concern because of how much CJ Stroud was sacked last year. But Callie comes in to try and turn that around, trying to scheme something up to maybe hide some of those deficiencies that the offensive line has had. They rebuilt the interior of the offensive line. They brought in a bunch of guys. I just don't know that they brought in these high-level guys that are going to actually change things around, especially when you lose Tunsil. You're naturally almost in an impossible place to truly build the offensive line back up to a top level. But we'll see how Callie goes about doing that, because, we did see CJ Stroud take a bit of a step back from what he did in his rookie year, which is expected. You got all this tape now on a guy. You kind of figure out what his tendencies are, and defensive coordinators are just too smart. So how Callie comes in and fixes that and gets him back to where he was in his rookie year. They've really improved the wide receiver room. They improved the running back room by adding Nick Chubb to pair up with Joe Mixon. So there's going to be a nice little mixture in there. So from a weapons perspective, I'm not overly concerned. You're concerned about the health of Tank Dell, which we'll get to, but they have so many bodies, and they have so much, a nice little combination of everything going around for CJ Stroud to work with, that Callie's going to have an abundance of riches here to scheme up something really creative. And coming over from that system that he's coming over from, the McVay, Shanahan, O'Connell system, these are really quarterback-friendly systems, which, he's going to bring his own little twist to it, coming from the Rams side of things as opposed from the 49er side of things. So we'll see how CJ Stroud responds to that. But I think that it's a proving ground, because Callie is taking over an offense. He doesn't have the offensive mind sort of looming over his head from an offensive coordinator perspective or even the head coaching perspective. And there's always a concern when that happens, when a guy sort of goes off on his own for the first time after being under a coach that is of the same side of the ball. You see it all the time. So this lack of experience is always going to raise a little bit of a red flag, the same way it would raise a red flag if the roles were reversed. So with Matt Burke, I give Matt Burke a pretty high grade, and the defensive coaching staff a really good grade, just because they are under the thumb of Demeco Ryans. And it's really his system, and Matt Burke's just sort of adding a little bit to it. But the overall performance is going to be based on what Demeco Ryans is able to present. Callie's in the opposite situation. Coming from an offensive-minded head coach, now he has to pretty much take what he learned over there, but now he has to do it without that CEO sort of overseeing it as much. Demeco Ryans is going to really hand him the reins here from a play calling perspective, from a week-to-week scheme perspective, from a drive-to-drive play calling strategy. It's all going to be new stuff for Nick Callie here. So there could be some growing pains early on, which is why he has to come in at this 75 grade 25th overall offensive coordinator to start the season. I think for all intents and purposes, this offensive scheme is just so effective and it's so well used throughout the entire league now that there's no reason why they can't produce with Callie, and why Callie, once he finds some sort of rhythm throughout the season, couldn't get himself into the top half of the league of offensive coordinators. But there's so many good offensive coordinators out there, and there's so many good defensive coordinators out there, that there could be a struggle early on with Callie. And, it's hard to predict what a first-year coordinator is going to be able to do once they're finally off on their own for the first time. So that's something to really watch. But I think overall, the coaching staff here is really solid as they're searching. They have a good foundation. It's very comparable to what we just covered with the Pittsburgh Steelers, where as long as you have a good foundation from the head coach and from like the trickle down theory, there's something really strong, then you can work around some of the deficiencies that you may have amongst like position coaches and the coordinator on the opposite side of the football. Sort of the way Pittsburgh's done over the years with their offensive coordinators. I think Demeco Ryans very similar to Mike Tomlin in a lot of ways, and sort of like this generation's version of him by my estimation. I think that's what we're going to end up seeing from him long term. So the offensive coordinator's got to settle in with one, and the unfortunate nature of having a Demeco Ryans as your head coach, a defensive-minded head coach, is that when the offensive coordinator ends up working out for you, you're probably going to lose him. So it's like a double-edged sword to a large degree. Now you can look at what has happened from Pittsburgh's perspective, comparing it to that, is when you have a great head coach, you can't hide a lot of the deficiencies of your coordinator because you've raised the floor of what the team could be so much. I think that's what Houston has done here from a defensive perspective, and we'll get to how high they are compared to the offense coming in. But then you have the offensive coordinator who can probably make a lot of money off a reputation that maybe he hasn't earned. So that's something that we're going to have to watch from, how well CJ Stroud executes, and situational football from the offensive perspective, and how Nick Cali comes up with a scheme for that is going to be, I think, the real key to this team and the real key to how this offense executes. It's the situational football, the third and shorts, the red zones, the fourth downs, when you third and longs, when you need those big plays, when you need to just extend a drive. How is Nick Cali going to scheme that up? And how is Demeco Ryans going to lay the foundation for what Nick Cali's even thought process will be? Because there's a culture building, there's an overall team strategy that both sides of the ball are going to have to work with. So how is Demeco Ryans' expectations for what the offensive side of the ball is going to look like affect the way Nick Cali calls things situationally throughout a game? And how is that going to have a negative effect, or will it have a positive effect? What's the net positive or net negative going to be there? But I think it's looking very positive for them, though. It would be time for an ad break. If I had ads, I don't. I don't have sponsors. I don't have fancy little codes to give out to you guys. But guess what? I should. I should, shouldn't I? I should. And that's why I need you guys to like, and I need you guys to subscribe. So then that way the people that would give me that stuff and give me the monies to do all that will actually believe that I deserve it. And do you guys think I deserve it? Tell me you think I deserve it. Come on, please. Please. All right, back to the players. So it's CJ Stroud coming in with an 88 grade. He's just hovering barely outside the top 10 for me. 11th to 13th. A little bit of a log jam there of the quarterbacks just on the fringe of that top 10 designation. Again, kind of a down year from what his rookie year was, but he's still a very, very good quarterback. I think that can't be understated. I think when you raise the expectations in your rookie year so high, there's only so many places you can go, right? But he was still out there making big-time throws. He just had some more turnover-worthy plays than you would like to see from him, with 17 of those, and the adjusted completion percentage was 72.2, which is not a great sign for, certain levels of accuracy. But from a deep ball perspective, he wasn't as good as he was previously. That intermediate level, he executed fantastic, with Nico Collins, and, he had Stephon Diggs for a little bit there at the beginning of the year. But now with the addition of Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, the two rookies, along with, maybe incorporating John Mechie a little bit more into the offense. When is Tank Dell going to be back? I think we'll see the deep ball in the short areas pick up the pace a little bit, because especially now you added Nick Chubb, the play action game is going to be what really keeps this offense pushing forward. Now, it's going to help protect the offensive line, and in terms of protect CJ Stroud from some of the deficiencies you're going to see from a blocking perspective, probably. And when the offensive line executes, he's as great as any quarterback. He was executing at a level that no other quarterback could say they were doing better when he was kept clean. The problem was that the offensive line was so inefficient that it did drag down the quality of that we were seeing from Stroud, because from a pressure perspective, he got the D+ grade. When he was facing the blitz and they picked it up, that was when he was able to really pick them apart as well. So he's really good at processing the game. It's just he needs the time. And I don't know if the offensive line is going to put him in this great position. So having a strong play action game is going to, in turn, hopefully impact the quality that CJ Stroud outputs throughout the year. And the play action game, and then the ability to then force a team to stack a box more so than they probably did last year when you have Mixon and Chubb now, to have that kind of rotation. If Nick Chubb gets back to 75% of what he was at his peak, then you've got like a top 15 back in him as a backup role with Joe Mixon as your main starter, and then you mix him in more throughout the season. That's just going to help CJ Stroud as well. They're going to stack all these boxes. Then you got these one-on-ones on the outside with Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins, even with Dalton Schultz up the seam. So as long as they're able to pick up the blitzes well, maybe they go into more like a max protection type of a thing and get a little bit bigger in the slot with Dalton Schultz in the slot. Or do they just go with all speed and they spread them out wide in that situation? And if you spread them out wide, then you're able to just run a quick little inside zone play with Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb to bring the box back down. And then what do you do from that? You do the read options out of that, where now you've forced these safeties to come down, and now you can throw it over the top of them on a quick little slant play or something, or a quick little in route. From a read option perspective. So the opportunities for CJ Stroud, based upon the weapons that he has, it's going to open up the game for him, I think, a little bit more than it did last year. You know, they really focused on having depth out there, so it's going to be tough outside of Nico Collins to figure out who the defense is going to focus on. So it's going to open up opportunities for a guy who, like Stroud, who's able to process the game, who's able to process when a blitz is coming, who's actually really good pre-snap and making those pre-snap adjustments. And here in his third year, should be even more so with all that extra studying he's been able to get in now, all the extra live action playing time. It's just sort of learning the new intricacies of this new offense that could probably slow him down early in the year like we talked about. But I think from a long-term perspective, once he gets comfortable with it, and he should get comfortable pretty quickly, he's proven that, especially in his rookie year, he was able to get super comfortable with things very quickly. So I don't expect CJ Stroud to do anything but gradually ascend back into top 10 status. I think there's just this little thing early on in the year that's going to keep him out of that. And how long that's sustained is really dependent on the chemistry that he builds with the offensive coordinator. So if Nick Cali can't really get a good rhythm going quickly, then maybe Stroud will continue to sort of hover outside the top 10 quarterback play for longer throughout the year. But by no means do I see CJ Stroud getting out of that top 12, top 15 quarterback. I think if he's playing as the 14th or 15th best quarterback in the league, that's considered to be a significant drop-off for him in terms of his quality and what his expectations are. But I think as you can give him more time through a good play-action game, that'll allow him to execute down the field a lot more. You know, bring those safeties down, force teams into more of like a cover 3 situation, more so than cover 4 or cover 2 shells. And that'll open up opportunities for CJ Stroud to really pick them apart the way that we've seen him do previously. So I think it's really looking up for him. I wouldn't put the designation of this MVP season because I think there's just too much going on around him that will take away from that in a voting perspective. But I think from a fantasy perspective, you could probably count on him, especially late in the year. I just would be, again, I'd be trepidatious about him early on just as the offense gets their sea legs underneath them. We'll check out the preseason that's already begun. They're definitely a team that I'm going to be watching a lot in the preseason just because I want to see, you know, if CJ Stroud, how much he plays and what they do with him when he is out there on the field, because a lot of it is just live action practice. So we'll see what that live action, you know, practice looks like for Stroud to sort of project what week 1s through 5 will probably look like for this team. He is getting the 10th best weapons room which, I mean, it's a great room. It's got a lot of depth here. They really focused on adding that depth and maintaining their depth. And it starts with Nico Collins, who's your true number one wide receiver there on the outside. Last year, he had 80 catches, 1,200 yards on 115 targets. His contested catches, 57%. Almost a 109 quarterback rating when targeted. 76% of what he did was on the outside. Now, almost a quarter of what he did was from the slot, which is them just creating these matchup issues for the opposing team, while allowing, faster guys to get onto the outside and sort of blow the top off there and make that safety, force that safety to make a decision. And then Nico Collins sort of executes in the intermediate areas. And then the quarterback's read is just really becomes, what's the safety doing? And that determines, does he throw it over the top or does he throw it there to Nico Collins about 12 to 13 yards down the field? I think we'll see some of that, especially with the addition of Jayden Higgins, who we'll get to shortly. Very similar players, but Collins, since getting with Stroud, it really allowed him to come into his own. Really establish himself as one of the top receivers in the game that he just wasn't able to do with such a turnstile at quarterback that was going on prior to that. Built up an immediate good chemistry with CJ Stroud. And I think that his size and his skill set appeals to a quarterback like Stroud, who has an accuracy and is able to pinpoint the ball in so many different areas. So his wingspan, the Nico Collins wingspan, and his athleticism and his length, that really becomes a much bigger asset than it was prior, when he didn't have quarterbacks who could really fit the ball into these pinpoint areas where, you want it slightly over the top of, upper left part of his helmet, because that's the only place the corner can't get the ball. Nico Collins can make those adjustments really well. He's got the great hands for that. But now he's got a quarterback that can put the ball in those weird areas and that can establish and figure out where that area is when throwing the ball. So all Nico Collins has to do is just catch it. And, sure hands, less than a 5% drop rate. I would anticipate this potentially being an even bigger year for him. I can see him getting to that 1,300, 1,400 yard mark. Because he was targeted 115 times. I'd like to see those targets go up to maybe 130 to get those catches up to closer to 90 catches this year. Just a really great player. It's just, again, it took some time. It took some time to get him in the right situation with the right quarterback, and that happens from time to time. They brought in a veteran, Christian Kirk, which was a sign to me that Tank Dell, who I still have ranked here despite his injury history, that he may not be ready come the season, and I don't know how much playing time he'll get during the season. But Christian Kirk coming in playing the slot wide receiver role, it's not a significant drop off from Tank Dell. I think Tank Dell has the higher ceiling at this point, or maybe he doesn't with the injuries. I think it's such a mystery with him. But they did add Jayden Higgins to have a true outside wide receiver opposite of him, and it's funny because Jayden Higgins got a lot of comparisons to Nico Collins coming out. You look at look at his size profile, look at his length, look at his, the wingspan, the way he's able to adjust his body, the way he's able to out-physical people, the amount of times he lines up in the slot just to create those matchup issues that we were talking about, where his teammate Jalen Knoll, who's also on this team, was able to then execute from the outside in those scenarios. So it's hard to say anything different than what we just said about Nico Collins, because they're just almost identical players for the most part. He's coming in with the 129 targets at Iowa State, 87 catches. Didn't have as many yards as you would hope, but 9 touchdowns. Contested catch rate was really good. I think having these two bookends there on the outside between Higgins and Nico Collins is going to make things very complicated for opposing defenses, because they're probably going to have to run a lot more cover 2, because there's going to be these two giant bodies out there on the outside that if they're running 12, 13 yards down the field, that's going to open up the game for someone like Christian Kirk in that traditional slot role, or like a Jalen Knoll can come in and play that role. John Mechie can come in and play that role. And then there's Dalton Schultz, who, if those two safeties are playing a cover 2 shell to account for the size of Higgins and Collins on the outside, then he's working one-on-one with linebackers over the middle. And that's going to be where he's going to get back to that top level tight end play. Now, 58% almost were as a traditional tight end, which is very rare from a guy who has the receiving ability that Schultz has. You know, he did have 92 targets last year. He only had 2 drops. That's another thing that we're looking at here, is that you're getting these weapons out for CJ Stroud who have very sure hands. You're not getting these guys out there that have 7 or 8 drops in a season and have like a 7 to 9% drop rate. These are guys that are all working under 5% on their drop percentage. So you'd like to see Schultz improve from a contested catch perspective. But I think, again, with all that size that's going to be working on the outside, he's going to be working guys who just don't have the coverage ability to stay with him. He's a very sneaky top tight end coming into this season from a statistical standpoint, probably from a fantasy standpoint, because of all the focus that these teams are going to have to put on the outside. Especially when you look within the division here. You know, you got Tennessee, you got Jacksonville, and you got Indianapolis. None of them really have like this true top cornerback out there that you can trust, like this tall, lengthy, athletic corners that can go out there and play these one-on-ones on the outside. So they're going to be rolling those safeties in cover 2 quite a bit. And when you can sort of predict and dictate to a defense what they have to run from a coverage perspective on the back end, that opens up a world of opportunities for your offense, because then now what you're doing is you're just creating situational matchups against linebackers and slot guys, and it makes the reads a lot easier. You can run a lot of flood to one side of the field now. You know, the mesh becomes a huge part of the offense, but I think the floods to the one side or the other becomes a tremendous weapon for you, especially when you got Nick Chubb and Joe Mixon, who can be great receiving running backs. But you can have Christian Kirk run that 10-yard out with Jaden Higgins or Nico Collins sort of blowing the top off the defense, and then Dalton Schultz takes something right up the seam, and then you run the running back into the flat, and now what is this defense going to do? If the safety drops, then you throw a jump ball up to Nico Collins, 6'5" Nico Collins, who's going to likely come down with that ball. If they don't, if they run a cover 2 over the top, then Christian Kirk, who's a great route runner out of the slot, you throw it there. Now, if they run the nickel into more like a cover 4 scenario, then you just hit the seam on Dalton Schultz, or you hit them underneath in the flat to the running back, who's then going to have all this space, and you just gave a great running back all that space to run with the football, and you're going to have a huge play run out of that. So as long as the offensive line's able to hold up, there's such a variety here, and the way the skill sets are going to work out, just sort of off the top there, you can see how they can run a relatively basic offense to attack these defenses really effectively here. And then being able to mix and match everybody in there. And if Tank Dell comes back healthy, then it opens up the game to a completely different level. I just wonder if with the additions of Kirk and Higgins and Noel, how much faith they really have in that Tank Dell if he does come back, if he's going to be at a truly high effective level the way he was projecting before. So that's a concern, certainly. But they have a tremendous run game to back up onto here. They're about 12th or 13th. Because, Mixon and Chubb as a combination, it's not like Saquon, it's not like Josh Jacobs, all that. So it's sort of coming in at this level because I do think that they're going to face probably some bigger boxes early on in the year while defenses figure out exactly what what Houston's going to be doing from a play calling perspective and how they're going to use the outside wide receivers and how quickly they're going to establish that. Because I think it's going to become one of those things where they're going to want to put pressure on the offensive line, which could play against what this running back room can produce. But you got Joe Mixon, who many people thought he might have been done when he left Cincinnati. Comes here and last year has 1,200 yards, 13 touchdowns, some pretty explosive runs, almost 840 yards after contact. He only put the ball on the ground once. And he did that on just under 300 carries. Now, he's not going to carry the ball that much this season. At least you hope he doesn't with Nick Chubb there now. But, man, like Mixon, from a well-rounded running back perspective, he's as well-rounded as they really can come. And I just think that as, the tread gets added to the tires, having him be the guy that carries the ball 274 times in a season, plus the amount of catches he would have, it's just not sustainable long-term. I think that's why you bring in a guy like Nick Chubb, is to be that counterbalance to him. Because I think from a skills perspective and from a skill set and archetype perspective, they're very close. They're almost the exact same kind of back who offer the exact same kind of skill. So you don't have to adjust or give away what you're doing on offense when either one of those guys is in. I just think Mixon is at this stage, with the horrific injury that Chubb suffered, is just a better back. Chubb had 99 carries last year. He only averaged 3.3 yards a carry. Now that is in Cleveland. That is coming off of that horrific knee injury. So it's hard to say that he'll get back to that level. He does come in with an 82, which is a really high level backup grade. He's a starter on so many other teams. He's a bell cow back. I just don't know that there was enough confidence that he was capable of being that, because that knee injury was horrific. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if he never got back to the level that we saw him at, say, 2 years ago, before this injury occurred. 3 years ago before this injury occurred. The 3.3 yards a carry is an issue here. Because, that means, the breakaway speed, not really there. But, again, chalk up last season to just him getting used to being on the field again. Getting himself healthy, getting himself comfortable to actually be out on the field. And we'll see what the bounce back looks like this season. Because he's going to get some really good opportunities. Now, he's going behind an offensive line that's probably worse than the one that he had in Cleveland just last year, if not slightly worse. At best, on par. So we'll see how much they can get the opposing defense to spread out to create opportunities for him to be effective. Because you want to get him up to that 4.5 yards a carry again. And if he doesn't, they do have Ogunbowale, they do have J.J. Taylor, Jawar Jordan, Dameon Pierce just went out for the year. So it's not like they don't have an effectively deep running back room to come in and give some variety. But you would hope that as the season progresses, Chubb would get more and more involved. Because like I said, you don't want Joe Mixon to be out there. You don't want him to have to carry the ball 280 times again this season. Because if he does, then that's not a good sign for what Nick Chubb is going to be able to contribute for you. And then that grade of 82 is probably going to be closer to, somewhere in the mid-70s in what he's able to contribute. And that doesn't help the offense at all. What's going to really help the offense this year, and again, hide the deficiencies that we're about to cover on the offensive line, is the fact that they're able to put in backs who are basically identical, or you don't have to change the offense, and it doesn't give away to the defense what it is exactly that you're going to do. I do think that a good rule of thumb that you guys saw from the weapons perspective is that I had Nick Chubb featured over Joe Mixon. I think early downs, you get Joe Mixon involved. And then those more passing situations, that's where Nick Chubb can come in, where it's going to be more spread out. It's going to give him more opportunities to not have to just fight through contact so much. I think it'll help him maybe get his confidence back, get the feel in that leg back to normal, even from a subconscious standpoint, because it didn't really seem like he had that last year either. And I think there is a world where Joe Mixon is forced to have 300 touches this year. And if that's the case, I don't know if this offense, from a success level, is going to be as high as people want it to be by the end of the season. I think it's going to hover more around where I have them ranked coming in week 1 than it would them improving as the season goes on. Here's the real problem with the team. It's the offensive line. 25th in pass blocking, 31st in run blocking. Now, they added a bunch of new guys. They added Trent Brown. They added Laken Tomlinson. They added Cam Robinson. They added Ed Ingram. They drafted Ariante Ursary. but they got rid of Laramie Tunsil. Now, who do you replace Laramie Tunsil with? Well, it's looking like it's going to be Cam Robinson or the rookie Ariante Ursary. But for now, it's Cam Robinson, who I just, for the life of me, can't understand how he's continuously getting starting jobs in the league. He's a backup quality, low end, barely starting quality left tackle. He's been that for a majority of his career. Maybe he's had flashes of it in Jacksonville. He got brought in to replace Christian Darrisaw when he got hurt in Minnesota, so I understand from that perspective you want a guy with starting experience, but he gave up 8 sacks on 685 snaps, 13 penalties, 64 pressures. He's just not somebody that when you lose a guy like Laramie Tunsil, when you trade that guy away and you go, well, our offensive line was a huge issue last year. How are we going to help fix it? I know, Cam Robinson. I don't get it. I don't get this move. I'd almost be more inclined to just start Ariante Ursary, the rookie, and just hope for the best, more so than anything else. Because even from a run blocking perspective, he's not giving you a whole lot. Especially from a zone perspective, he's a D+. And you know you're going to see a lot of zone running this year. So I don't like this signing at all. I think that, Cam Robinson he's just not the right guy to bring in for this scenario here. They did bring in Laken Tomlinson, which from an interior offensive line perspective is fine. You got Juice Scruggs, who is going to be competing for starting reps. You got Ed Ingram as well. You brought in free agency, who's going to be competing as well. So you got really 4 guys competing for snaps on the interior. Jarrett Patterson, from a pass blocking perspective, is actually really good. So you want him to be your starter at center. I wouldn't necessarily look for him to be the odd one out here. And I wouldn't say Titus Howard is the odd one out either, because he's really the best all-around offensive lineman that you got. He gave up 6 sacks and 741 snaps, had 4 penalties. The thing is that he sort of found himself in the situation that Elton Jenkins and Mike Owenu have found themselves in, where he's never been allowed to truly settle in as a guard or a tackle. He started as a tackle, then he was a guard, then he was a tackle again, now he's a guard again. He keeps bouncing around, and when there's injuries that pop up, they just kick him out to tackle. I think that's kind of unfair to what his production could be long term, but I think that's going to keep him just on the team. He has a high floor at least, which I think is what they're just looking for at this point with the offensive line. And, from a run blocking perspective, he's sort of in the same boat where he's not a great run blocker. He's thankfully a better zone blocker than he is a gap blocker, because you're going to see a lot more zone in this team. But he's still just not at that level. He hasn't had time. Maybe now he can settle in, be a guard all year, and find some sort of rhythm in his game. But then you got Trent Brown at right tackle, and Trent Brown's not exactly Mr. Healthy all the time. And you got Blake Fisher, who's not exactly very good. So they didn't do enough here. They just didn't do what they were supposed to do with this offensive line, which was the problem of the team. They're sort of hiding behind the fact that they brought in Tomlinson and Ed Ingram and drafted Ariante Ursary, but where's the true immediate impact here? I would love to know what the real explanation is for why you trade Laramie Tunsil when there really wasn't any sign that he was demanding a trade or anything. Like, there's talks about him just being, teams don't like negotiating with him because of how he goes about his contracts and how he likes to sign his contracts with the guaranteed money and the extensions and everything. But the guy is just so good. That's kind of like, why do you put up with it? Especially when it's like, okay, what's the alternative? The alternative, was Cam Robinson. So you went from having at least something with the signings of Laken Tomlinson and Ed Ingram and the drafting of Ariante Ursary and the signing of Trent Brown, where you could have been top 20 at least in both of these categories. And it would have made, I think, me and others a lot more confident in what this offense would be capable of pulling off this season. But now you're sort of putting yourself in a spot where you have to rely a lot on the play action, which, I mean, good thing that they got the running backs that we just covered. But when you have a guy like Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins on the outside, you kind of need to create time for them to get down the field and for them to create the separation. They're not like a Christian Kirk or, whoever that's going to be able to create separation really quickly. That's just not what the skill set is. Their separation is coming at the intermediate, not in the short. So in order to do that, if this offensive line doesn't come together, then you're just sort of have to rely on play action every time, and that's just not sustainable long-term throughout a season. You need to be able to just straight up drop back and have the time to set your feet and let the routes develop. And there's a tremendous concern with me that this is just not going to happen for them on a consistent basis, and that CJ Stroud is actually going to get sacked more this year than he did last year, and not from a perspective of him holding on to the ball for too long or anything. It's just not having the time to get to that second read, and having to pretty much do all the work pre-snap and hope that the pre-snap reads all worked out and that you did the proper studying leading up to that week to pull everything off pre-snap to know where the ball is going. So we could see a repeat of that. I think it's more likely than not from the amount of times he's pressured and sacked. It's going to be very similar to what we just saw last year at best. But unless Cam Robinson really comes out of nowhere, or Ariante Ursary is this prodigy, blue chip prodigy that has immediate impact and wins out a job in camp, it could be a long year for CJ Stroud, and it's going to be, a very complicated offensive strategy to get around some of these deficiencies here. And God forbid they pick up an injury. I mean, if you're going to pick up an injury, it better be on the interior. We'll say that, because you at least got the bodies there that are replacement level players, but it's not promising. It's not promising. I would love to hear the explanation as to why they thought this was a good idea and why they thought this made their team better, because it just doesn't. So overall, it's my 19th ranked offense coming into the season. 12th passing offense, 18th rushing offense. There's just too many questions about how well they're going to be able to execute their strategy with the deficiencies of the offensive line. And the offensive coordinator being a first time in this role, him trying to navigate and figure out what's best from a strategy standpoint. How well is Demeco Ryans going to be able to keep him on track? Just questions. Now moving over to the strength of this team, Demeco Ryans is bread and butter, the defensive side of the ball. And we start with the defensive line. 7th in terms of their pass rush, 21st in run defense. And that really just comes from the fact that their best run defenders are their edge players, as you can see from some of these grades. From an interior perspective, there's just not a whole lot in terms of that run defense. It's something that's going to have to be schemed up and hopefully executed that way with a rotation more than anything else. But we'll start with Will Anderson, who was the CJ Stroud of this team in terms of a defensive perspective for Demeco Ryans when he first came here. He had 12 sacks last year. He was 12th in pass rush win percentage. He only had 560 snaps, which, you want to see that number get up, a healthier long-term season here. 8 quarterback hits, 51 pressures overall. He's just a quality player. And I think him coming over from Alabama, where they're very much coached on discipline, they're very much coached on the fundamentals and to play aggressive and intelligent defense, I think that allows him to really execute from a pass rushing perspective, even though that's not the best part of his game. You wouldn't know that it's not the best part of his game just because of how aggressive he plays and how smart he is at the point of attack. How he attacks an offensive lineman, how he converts speed to power, how he comes out with different pass rushing moves constantly. And I think having a really good partner and a really good depth around him helps keep him fresh. And even if he's just on an early down run perspective, I mean, he's one of the best of the entire league at this. It truly is his best asset. is what he's able to do in run defense. He's coming up as one of these, he's a great high-end number 2 pass rusher, great number 1 edge setting, run defending defensive end. And I think his ability to move around, and again, he uses his eyes really well in figuring out where the ball is while still remaining active. I think that's the key to him being so effective in run defense, is he comes out immediately with like the pass rush mentality, but he quickly gets his eyes on where that ball is, and he is very instinctual on where the ball actually is ending up. If it's a play action, he's really good at identifying it. He almost rarely, never gets himself caught up not in the right position on a play action pass, or if it is a straight up handoff, he's very good at creating the angle and committing to it and making the right decision in that commitment as well, which makes him incredibly effective behind the line of scrimmage and blowing up a lot of these run plays. He was 27th in stops percentage. They run the ball away from him a lot, and they put him in a lot of messed up positions as offensive coordinators because they know that this is what he's good at, and this is how he's going to blow up your entire offense on a week-to-week basis. From the interior of the defensive line, though, and we'll get to Danielle Hunter shortly, you wonder what this is going to look like from a rotation standpoint. Now, they brought in Sheldon Rankins, who to me is just, I don't know. Tim Settle, I just like better than him. From a pass rush perspective, they're equal to me in terms of run defense. Same thing with Mario Edwards. I think from a size perspective, and Mario Edwards much more of a 3-4 defensive end type compared to Settle and Rankins. But then Tommy Togiai, I think, is almost as good as Settle and Edwards from a pass rush perspective, and he's the best run defending interior defensive lineman. So I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year he's maybe the one that ends up with the highest snap count out of everybody. But there is this they really like Sheldon Rankins. The league seems to like Sheldon Rankins, even though he's bounced around a bit. Junior Tafuna, the rookie they brought in, I think from a run defending perspective, can get some playing time as well. Jaden Peavy, I think he's the odd one out here because he doesn't execute well in run defense, and they got guys that play interior defensive line that can rush the passer. Even when you include Demeco Autry in that, he's sort of just more like the 3-4 defensive end here, sort of like Mario Edwards. I could see him being Mario Edwards. Him and Mario Edwards are the ones competing for snaps more so than the competition involving the other defensive linemen here. But then even when you look at the opposite edge of Will Anderson, it's Danielle Hunter, the veteran coming over from Minnesota last year. And just, again, really great season. 12 sacks as well, 14th in win percentage, 13 quarterback hits, 66 pressures. He had more snaps, which is what killed his pass rush win percentage in comparison to Will Anderson. But that's a really good snap count for him. Almost 760. You'd like to see Will Anderson get up there as well. But Danielle Hunter, like Will Anderson, very balanced in his game. And I think that credit has to go to Ryans and Burke for how they scheme up their defensive ends and the expectations of what their defensive ends are to do from play to play that allows them to be effective in run defense as well, because he's nothing to be dismissed here. He's the second best run defender on the team, even though he's got like number 1 run defender abilities. And that's something that he really developed here last year with Houston. So we're looking to see him do the exact same thing coming out of the gate this season, and just helping carry this team for a little bit. Because, we just covered the offensive grades, and this is the group that's really going to be doing a lot of the work. Again, very similar to what Pittsburgh has going on. Obviously, Pittsburgh's they're significantly better overall, but it's a group that's good enough that they could raise the floor of what this team can do execution-wise, especially when you got some of these depth pieces in there, especially Derek Barnett, who's He's like the perfect creation for a number 3 edge player here because he can play the run and he can rush the passer. So he can come in and he can sub for either one of these ends, either one of these edge players, and he'll be able to execute no matter what the situation is. That's an invaluable feature for them to have. Darrell Taylor, much more just a pure pass rusher, so we'll see him come in those situations as well. I think there's scenarios, though, where you'll have Anderson, Barnett, and Hunter on the field at the same time. I think there's situations where you'll have Anderson, Hunter, and Taylor on the field at the same time, mixed in with like a Mario Edwards or Demeco Ryans if they're trying to get smaller, more athletic, and more speed out there. But I like having the variety as well to be able to put Barnett in a run situation because you maybe want Hunter or Anderson to have fresher legs in a pass rush scenario at a certain point in the game. Being able to have a guy that go out there and do that, because for all intents and purposes, Derek Barnett on most other teams is a starter with these types of grades. He's starting quality. So it really speaks to the depth that they've created here from a defensive line perspective. And you just want to see them on the interior. We talked about it with the coaching staff, sort of in the intro too. You just want to see what the interior does from a run blocking perspective, because you don't want to just leave these linebackers hung out to dry, because at the end of the day, that's going to be what kills your team, is the inability to get off the field, because teams are just going to be able to run in the B gap and the A gap all game, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. Now, the linebackers do have to make up for a lot of the deficiencies that we're going to see from the interior defensive line in terms of the run perspective, but they've built a linebacking group that is definitely capable of doing that. They're top 5 in run defense for me, either 4th to 6th worst case scenario, just as a top 5. From a coverage perspective, they don't offer a whole lot. But I don't think that that's necessarily what Demeco Ryans needs from them anyway, because of the deficiencies they have interior defensive line-wise in run defense. You have Azeez Al-Shaair, who is, from a personality perspective, maybe not somebody that you like, but he's somebody that when he's on your team, you probably love him. He was 5th in stops percentage amongst all linebackers last year. Only had 56 tackles, but I think he's going to get a lot more playing time now. I think he's established as the number 1 linebacker on this team. 2 forced fumbles, 14 pressures last year, so he was blitzing kind of well. The pass coverage wasn't good. He was kind of losing himself in zone quite a bit, but his contributions are in the run game. And him being aggressive and instinctual and filling the gaps effectively, anticipating where the gaps are going to pop up, really using his eyes. Again, we talk about using his eyes, communication, and all that, seeing the pulling guards and understanding where the ball would go in those situations and getting into position really well and sort of bailing out, again, the interior defensive line that they have there. Then you got Henry To'oTo'o and you got EJ Speed, EJ Speed coming over from Indianapolis. Those two are going to be competing for the linebacker 2 snaps here, and I think that To'oTo'o, just because he's a little bit better in coverage than EJ Speed is, to me he gets the favor in that scenario. Though I do think EJ Speed, if he's gonna get out there, it's a good rotational piece for them to have. So you could have a 3 linebacker set out there and be really effective against the run. I think you can sub in EJ Speed for To'oTo'o too. It's just Azeez Al-Shaair is going to be that green dot linebacker from my perspective. They also had Nick Neiman and Jake Hansen, who, sneaky good depth pieces as well. Hansen from a special teams perspective, I think that's where he's going to really make the team. I think Neiman as well. The odd one out is just Christian Harris, who they put a lot of faith in coming out of Alabama, and it looked like that first year with the Demeco Ryans that was going to be the guy, and then it just never really worked out that way. So unfortunately, Harris seems to be the odd one out. You would kind of hope for there to be more size in your linebacker group, but I think Al-Shaair plays a lot bigger than what he actually is. I think To'oTo'o plays with a level of football IQ, of course, coming from the University of Alabama. That IQ really helps out as well and allows him to put himself in situations where he's not going to be exploited for the lax for the deficiencies he has in his game, and allows him, I think he's going to grow a little bit more. So that's why I like him over EJ Speed in that sense as well. I feel like EJ Speed sort of is what he is at this stage in his career, which I think is a really good linebacker 2 type who's just going to be in a linebacker 3 scenario here. But I think having him, and it's sort of like having Derek Barnett on the defensive line, where you're going to be really comfortable subbing him in, and he'll be a really effective substitution and help out. And when you have this kind of depth in your front 7, in your linebacking group, it does help out a lot. And I think that's also going to help them in run defense as well. You're just hoping that the interior defensive line is able to do their job where these linebackers aren't meeting these running backs 4 yards down the field, which is a real possibility, and it will in turn make them look bad. So let's hope that the interior defensive line can make this work so these linebackers can use their skill set to create, TFLs and, under 3 yards a carry from some of these running backs. Now on the back end, they have my best graded defensive back group in terms of pass coverage. They're 18th against the run, but that's virtually insignificant when you're the best coverage group in the entire league. And you look at some of these grades that are out here, their top 3 guys, their 2 corners and their nickel and Jalen Pitre, amazing talents. What an amazing rookie year from Kamari Lassiter. We'll start with Derek Stingley, who really established himself as a top corner in the league. You look at the amount of times he was targeted, 83 times, gave up only 38 catches for less than 400 yards. He allowed 3 touchdowns, but had 5 interceptions and 10 pass breakups, a 47 passer rating with only 2 penalties on 909 outside snaps, 1,009 snaps in total from traditional cornerbacks positions. Was amazing in zone coverage, played really well in man. He was as locked down as you can get from a guy, and somehow just sort of fell under the radar because of Patrick Surtain. But man, he was just phenomenal all year. And to have like an under 50% target rate when you're targeted that many times, that just speaks to his ability to play one-on-one in coverage, his ability to anticipate route combinations, to anticipate the quarterback throwing the ball, to stay sticky on the outside without taking penalties. The only 2 penalties when you're on the field for over 1,000 snaps and you're targeted 83 times. That just shows that you're really sure about your technique, that from where you're putting your hands and all that perspective, that you're executing that really well, and that from a fundamental to instincts to execution level, you've pretty much got it mastered. And it speaks a lot to Demeco Ryans to get him to accelerate his production up to this level. And it really helps out the defense that you're able to have that kind of guy out there on the field, because then you can turn to Kamari Lassiter, second-year player Kamari Lassiter, who can lock down the other side of the field. Now, he's a little bit lesser in zone coverage than Derek Stingley, but 69 targets, only 33 catches given up. Less than 50% of his targets were given up. Now, he gave up four touchdowns, but he only had a 69.1 passer rating when targeted and 3 penalties. Took less snaps, obviously, but I think as you work him in this year, he's a number 1 quality corner coming off that rookie season. People talked about Tariq Woolen having a great rookie year, Devon Witherspoon having a great rookie year, Sauce Gardner having a great rookie year. Kamari Lassiter had one of the best rookie seasons from a cornerback ever. And I'm not understating that. The fact that he had that kind of production, playing almost completely on the opposite side of the field, where teams were running away from him, and he was doing a lot of this, chasing guys around, and it was a really well executed season from Lassiter, and having this type of production on the back end only helps the front 4 that we just covered has some really quality edge rushers out there. The way he was using his length, and again, him and Derek Stingley both, they executed so well with their technique and their fundamentals, and they were coached up so well to be able to do that. that they became the best 1-2 punch in the entire league. You throw in Jalen Pitre, who from a nickel perspective and just how aggressive he plays in the run game, it's the perfect combination. You know, Pitre was much more of a safety, and he's very similar to what they have in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. But I think having these two guys together, it allowed that variety. It's sort of like what we covered with the Steelers when you have Deshaun Elliott and you have Jalen Ramsey. Now you have Pitre and you have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson here, CJ Gardner-Johnson, who's another guy. You know, he took 602 safety snaps last year. He only had 94 slot snaps, 204 box safety snaps. But I think his ability to play in the slot is really big for this team. Now, he gave up 7 touchdowns last year, but that's because, you know, of just the situation that he had to play in Philadelphia. He had 6 interceptions, though, and 6 pass breakups, under an 86 passer rating given up, which for a safety, we've seen some really good cover safeties coming up who have had better passer ratings against them than this. So I think CJ can still play. I think he's still really aggressive. I think he's really mastered that box safety position, which I think he'll end up being able to play a lot more based upon, you know, you got Jimmy Ward, who's kind of coming off an injury here. See how much he plays. But you got Kalen Bullock as well. And then having Pitre to be able to sort of sub in and out with and mix and match and scheme-wise and all that. I think Chauncey Gardner-Johnson being in this group really does elevate it to an even better level, especially because he's one of the better cover guys playing the safety position. And, you know, not for nothing, he had all this production playing majority safety position last year for Philadelphia. So we will see what his role will be on this team. I do anticipate, because they have Jalen Pitre, they have Jimmy Ward, they have Kalen Bullock, we'll see CJ playing more of like what we see Kyle Hamilton doing in Baltimore. And then even from the corner perspective, some of the depth they have here, Jalen Smith, the rookie coming out of USC, really good against the run. He played really well against the run. He's a pretty good cover guy too for a rookie coming in. You know, the veteran Ronald Darby's always there just in case, you know, Smith doesn't work out the way that you're hoping and doesn't develop throughout the season, and maybe you pick up an injury or whatever. You have a really good high IQ guy that you can put in some zone coverage and execute for a couple plays at a time. You know, Elijah Huzzy is another guy to watch here. You know, not a great cover guy coming in. You know, he is a rookie, but I think from a aggressiveness and run perspective, he's pretty good too. So they've done a really great job of adding depth to this group as well as adding Gardner-Johnson, who's just a quality starter, a high-quality starter. And I think from a chemistry perspective, the skill sets really match up well. They really mesh well. So this is going to allow some time for that front four to develop a strategy and maybe have some more longer drawn-out, you know, twists and stunts up front, because they got this great quality on the back end. And then once that front four starts executing, could you imagine these guys not having to worry about having to face too many double moves, not having to worry about these long drawn out route combinations where they can play so instinctual? This group could really blow up a lot of games this year for the opposing offenses. I'm really excited about what this group can be. Of course, the real question mark is Jimmy Ward. Is Jimmy Ward going to get back healthy enough? But having Kalen Bullock, you at least have something to work with there and something that can develop there. And I think having Gardner-Johnson being able to play that deep safety role does make things a lot easier. Again, I don't know that you want it to happen all year. I don't think that's necessarily the best use of him, is to make him like this traditional center fielder. But I think having the ability to do that if you need to, while Jimmy Ward gets back healthy and Kalen Bullock gets more confident in pass coverage, it's just invaluable. And then having Pitre being able to just play solely in the nickel role, and you're getting like one of the better nickel guys in the entire league. It just really keeps things. It helps keep the boat afloat in case things start going wrong up front. And then just having Derek Stingley on one side of the field, Lassiter on the other side of the field, and knowing that you got those two sides of the field pretty much locked down. Now your safeties get to play much more in in between the numbers more so than outside the numbers, which then creates like this log jam over the middle of the field with the opposing offense's tight ends and slot receivers, which takes away a huge aspect of so many teams' games, especially within the division, because you got Indianapolis that's going to love using Josh Downs in the slot and Tyler Warren and whatnot. But if you can create that logjam, those guys are not going to be effective. Same thing with Tennessee with Chigakonkwo and whatever. So from how you match up just within your division alone, this is a nightmare for the opposing teams you're going to be playing. A 4th ranked defense, 3rd pass defense, 5th run defense, and that's without a great interior defensive line. So the linebackers doing a lot of heavy lifting here for this group. So if they get something going from an interior defensive line perspective against the run and get that defensive line's run defense grade into like the top 12, then this could be right up there with the Pittsburgh Steelers as one of the best offenses in the entire league. They just kind of fall short from a scheme perspective, and that kind of keeps them out of that. And you know, there is a significant separation between the number 2 pass defense and the number 3 pass defense, but I think they have the secondary to make this work, and I think they're going to be forcing a lot of teams to run. It just, the linebackers are going to have to play maybe a little bit tighter to the offensive line, which is going to drag the safeties down, which could leave them vulnerable over the top. Running through their schedule, they have the 18th ranked strength of schedule with a 481. Their Vegas over-under is 9.5 wins, and I got it over. You know, I think they can sweep Jacksonville and Tennessee right out the gate, and I think they can sweep Indianapolis. There's no reason they should lose a divisional game this year. They're just so significantly better than these teams across the board. So they're getting, by my estimation, 6 wins right away. And then they catch Arizona at home. So I feel like that's 7 wins right there. And then you look at, you know, they get Baltimore, Kansas City, and the Chargers all on the road, which is, that sucks. So, you know, those are the games I think I would bet against them for sure. Just getting those teams and on the road, that's rough. But then, you know, you get the Vegas Raiders at home. You get San Francisco at home. You get Seattle, but you get them on the road, so that kind of just is you a bit. The first 2 games of the year can go either way as well. So by my estimation, 7, 8, 9, 10 and a half, 11 wins here. So I think 11 wins is a reasonable number for this team. So we'll see how that works out. But I think from a divisional perspective, they're just too good compared to these other teams where that's going to be a threat to them. So that's why I think, you know, at worst, they're a 9-win playoff team, a 9-win divisional winner. But that would be if like the wheels start to fall off a little bit here, which I just don't anticipate. I anticipate them being a team that actually gets better throughout the year, which I think you can see reflected in their wins from one side to the other. How quickly they get up to that, I think, will determine how well they do against Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver in that little patch there. But I think by the time they're getting down to the end there, Arizona and the Vegas Raiders, I think that they'll have to have it figured out by then. They are my 13th ranked team, 12th ranked head coach, 19th offense, and the number 4 defense in the entire league, which gives them a tremendous safety blanket to fall back on while their offense figures it out, being 19th. And there it is, my number 13 team in my 2025 NFL Deep Dive Series. Boy, we're moving. We're so close to the end. We're almost in the top 10. We just covered the Houston Texans, as you guys saw. Please like this video and subscribe if you made it this far. And you guys tell me in the comment section what you think of the Houston Texans going into this year. And I will see you guys with the next video next time. See ya.